Today's daf is daf Pei Aleph. We're up to Pei Aleph in Nedarim. And of course, if you want to hear about Miriam's trip, this is all recorded. So you just have to go to the show website and
Oh my
hopefully we'll
God.
be there. I don't know who goes, but we'll find out maybe. So we're actually, he said he's 5 lines from the top. So I'll catch everyone up. It is the beginning of something. But there's an interesting discussion in this is a new parak that we started 2 days ago. Is it the last? I think it's the last parak, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, the last parak too. So the discussion here is about what a husband can, or a father in some cases, what a husband though can be mayfair from an Nedarim standpoint. And of course, the pasuk says that if a woman makes a neder la'anot nafesh to punish her or harm her nefesh, isha yikimenu v'isha yiferenu. The husband can be mekayim it or can be meifar. So we learn from there that therefore the husband only has power over Nedarim that have inoi nefesh, which means some kind of suffering. We compared it yesterday to Yom Kippur, where there's a prohibition on, there's a mitzvah to do things that are inoi nefesh, right? And a prohibition on doing things that are not. But of course, last parak, we discussed that there's another group of Nedarim that a husband can be mayfair. And those are things that are beino leveina. Those are things that affect the husband himself, or a father in that case, personally, potentially. Let's stick with the husband though. And the difference between those two categories is that a neder that is inoi, a husband can be made for completely. But a neder that he's being made for because it's beino leveina, he can only be made for it for himself, but not for other people. So for example, if a woman says, I want to wash, or I don't want to take a shower, if you call that inoi, if you call it suffering not to shower, then the husband can be made for it completely. But if you don't call it suffering not to shower, then we're going to discuss later today, maybe it's not suffering for her, but maybe it's a suffering for him to be with his wife when she didn't take a shower. So potentially she could take a shower when she is with him, but not when she's with other people. Like let's say he dies or she gets divorced, right? So that's a question that we're going to actually address later today, but that's the difference between yourself and others. And the case we had yesterday, which was very interesting, is that even though Rabbi Yossi says in our Mishnah that taking a shower is not considered inoi nefesh, that even though it's not what we mean by inoi nefesh, if a woman makes a neder that she's not going to bathe, the husband cannot be made for it for inoi nefesh. But if she says, I'm not going to wash my clothing, he can be made for it. And we said yesterday that even though she can't necessarily wash herself, your clothing is absolutely required, because if you don't wash your clothing, you get into all kinds of illnesses and sicknesses and that stuff that you obviously cannot live without that. So washing is very important. So today we continue this discussion. We are, where am I? Sholchu mitam, 5 lines from the top on Pei Aleph Amid Aleph. They sent a message from there, usually mitam, well, not usually, it means from Eretz Yisrael. They sent a message that this is the tradition that we have. And in this list of things, one of them, which is why we're bringing it, is his haru ba'arvuvita. You should be careful about not mixing together things. This is, not keeping dirty clothing and dirty hair, because you can get sicknesses, as we said yesterday. And furthermore, they said he's haru b'chabura. You should be careful to always have friends. You should always learn or study with a group of people, because if you do it by yourself, you can easily get misled or think you're correct when you're not. So you should be careful to always have a group with you as much as you can, like Daf Yomi. He's haru b'nei aniyim. And you should be always careful to make sure that you're teaching, this is how the way the Ran understands it, which doesn't make sense, that you are teaching the b'nei aniyim, that you teach kids who are poor, even if they can't necessarily afford to pay you, or it's hard, they don't have the background. You should always include b'nei aniyim in your school, in your chabura, because that's where the future is. Shemehem titzei Torah, because Torah really comes from those who are born poor, or grow up poor. Shenemar yizal mayim midalyo. It says in the pasuk you should pull water from dalyo, literally means from the well, or the bucket actually. But here we're dashing it from dal, from those who are poor, right? So that water, mayim, of course, is Torah, comes from those who are poor. Shemehem titzei Torah, because Torah comes from those who are b'nei aniyim. The Ran gives 2 explanations here. This is a famous Gemara, of course. The Ran gives 2 explanations. One explanation of the Ran is that the reason that we say that Torah, Daf Pei Aleph, where we are, that Torah comes from those who are poor, is primarily the Ran thinks because those who are poor essentially they have less. Well, I'll tell you first pshat. First pshat is that they have less to do, right? So that they're not as occupied. If you call the family business, you have a lot of wealth, then you're distracted by taking care of your money. So if you have no money, nothing to worry about, you don't have what to do, so you can spend your time learning Torah or excelling in Torah. But the other pshat, which I think is obviously the other pshat is that they are less stuck up. They have lower expectations, right? So they're willing to work harder to achieve success because it wasn't given to them. And so that because of that, there are people who will put in the time and the effort and be more likely to be successful. And so therefore, you should make an effort to include those who are b'nei aniyim, the children of poor people, in your chabura to teach them Torah as well. Shemehem tetzei Torah. We are, where are we? 1, 2, 3, 4, 8 lines from the top. Why is it, the Gemara asks, very interesting question. Why is it that it's difficult, it's unusual to find a Talmud Chacham have children who are also Talmidei Chachamim? That very often, it's certainly the case, there are exceptions, there's no question, but that it's pretty common, and if you think about the Gemara, think of how few of the you think of how few of the scholars are, have children, or you think about their parents being scholars, Abaya and Rava, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The list goes on and on and on. It's rare to have a Talmid Chacham have children who are Talmidei Chachamim. Why is that the case? Amar Rav Yosef, it's on purpose. It's essentially the bar is very high. Shelo Yomru Torah Yerusha Hilachem. We don't want people to say that they are given Torah as an inheritance, that you don't have to work for it, that it's not open to everybody, that it's something that you get because you grew up in that environment. Torah is not easier to acquire just because it is something that your parents or your grandparents might have had. Torah has to be worked for every person. That's one explanation. Now, Sheshet Ravidi says, the reason we have this behavior, that this reality that Talmidei Chachamim usually do not have children who are Talmidei Chachamim is because we don't want them to take it for granted. We want them to assume, I grew up rich, you're going to be rich, right? I grew up with a house of Talmidei Chachamim, I'm going to be a Talmid Chacham, and therefore lord it over other people, be mitzgader, which means to be powerful over the tzibur. We don't want them to have that attitude. So we don't want them to know it shouldn't be, and it isn't given for them. Mar Zutra says, no, it's a punishment. It's this is one girsa. Because in fact they are, right? That the kids, you could say to the parents or the kids, but one of them, the kid grew up a child of a Talmid Chacham, their father was the head of the school, and they took liberties with the people, and they took advantage. They were not kind, and therefore it's less likely for them to become Talmidei Chachamim themselves, essentially as a punishment. Rav Ashi says, you can analyze this in great detail. Rav Ashi says, Mishum dekar le'inshi chamri. It's because they think of other people as being beneath them. They call other people chamarim, which is not a very nice thing to call people, like donkeys. So that these are people, they grew up in these elite families, and they call them, again, this is if that happens, but he's saying it's common, is that they look down at other people, and therefore they're essentially punished, or they're not accessible for them to become Talmidei Chachamim. So that's why. And Ravina says, She'ein mevarchin b'Torah tchila. The fifth reason given by Ravina is that they don't make a bracha before they learn Torah, which again is a very strange reason, right? So that they don't make a blessing before they learn Torah. I'll say the simplest explanation, or maybe in one simple explanation, is that they're not as enthusiastic, they're not as excited, they don't come to it with the same, someone who didn't grow up with something and they get this opportunity to learn and to appreciate learning, they're very enthusiastic and excited about it, and they make the bracha with excitement. But those who it's given, of course you wake up and learn every day, of course this is what you do, not suggesting that they don't make the bracha, but they don't make it with the same desire and rush. You make a bracha, you're excited about something. They don't have that excitement. And where do you see something similar? Rav Yehuda Amarav, we're again a third of the way down by the start. Rav Yehuda Amarav said, "My dichtiv." It's a very enigmatic pasuk in Yirmiyahu, which I'm going to read to you from Navas because Nava has the psukim. It says in Yirmiyahu in the 9th parak, I'm reading the whole pasuk now. Mi ha'ish hachacham v'yavein et zot. Who is the person who's wise who will understand this? Va'asher diber pi Hashem elav, the person God will speak to. V'yagida, and will tell you. I'm reading the whole verse here. Alma avda haaretz. Why? What was the reason that the land was destroyed, was lost? Nitzta kimidbar b'li over. It was, uprooted like a midbar, a desert, without people walking through it. So the pasuk in Yirmiyahu has this very enigmatic discussion. Like, who can tell you why the land was destroyed? Right. So says Rav Yehuda Marav, what does it mean in that pasuk? Mi ha'isha chacham v'yavenetzot. Who is a wise person who will understand this? Meaning, now we're inserting words here. Davar zeh nishal dechachamim v'leneviim v'lo pirshu. They asked the wise people, the chachamim. They asked the neviim, the ones who God spoke to, and nobody could explain why God destroyed the Beit HaMikdash, why the Bnei Yisrael were exiled from their land in the first temple. Until God explained it to the Bnei Yisrael, to the Nevi'im at least. The pasuk continues, Vayomer Hashem said the reason that they were exiled, and I'll read the whole pasuk now again, it's the next verse in Yirmiyahu, Al azvam et torati, because they abandoned the Torah, asher natati lifnechem, which I gave to them, v'lo shamu b'koli v'lo halchu. They didn't listen to my voice and they didn't follow in my paths, right? Now, what does that mean? Right? What it says they don't follow, it says they didn't do it. Hainu lo shamu b'koli, right? Hainu lo halchu. It says they didn't listen to my voice and they didn't walk in the path. So why is that? It's redundant. It means the same thing. So what does that mean? Therefore, said Rav Yehuda Marav, it means she'im mevarchin b'torah tchila. It means that they didn't make a bracha before they learned Torah. And so that was a criticism of the Jewish people in the first temple period. And that's why they were exiled. The Ran here quotes from Rabbeinu Yonah, a beautiful explanation that, what is that? What in the world does this mean? So the Ran's point, or he quotes Rabbeinu Yonah, it's a beautiful explanation, is that obviously it doesn't mean they didn't follow the Torah. Because if they didn't follow the Torah, which the Gemara says elsewhere, by the way, but if they didn't follow the Torah, right, then you didn't need to ask a Navi to explain this, right? If they didn't follow the laws and God punished them, then that's obvious. So it must have been something much more subtle. It must have been nothing overt, right? It's not that they abandoned God and therefore God abandoned them. It must have been that they actually were following all the commandments. They were doing all the rules. They seemed to be doing the right thing. And that was the wonder, that they asked the Nevi'im, the Chachamim, so why was the land destroyed if everyone was following laws properly? And that's where God explained that even though they followed it properly, they didn't do it with the right, I would say, enthusiasm or excitement or energy. And so just doing the actions was not enough. You need to do more than just do the actions. In our Gemara's term, you need to make a bracha first. You need to feel blessed about what you're doing. And they didn't feel that way. And so that's true about the nation in the first Beit HaMikdash. But it's also true about Bnei Talmidei Chachamim, that they generally take for granted what they've been given, and therefore they are less likely to become Talmidei Chachamim as they grow up.
Is that what it means? Dahinu la'asok b'divrei Torah v'ha'erev na v'asher bachar? That's it? That's what you're...
Those are the blessings. The blessings are, right, the Birkot HaTorah that we say are la'asok b'divrei Torah and ha'erev na, right? That's what we say every morning.
Sure, okay.
Yeah. Okay. So anyway, so that's what it means, that they didn't, the words he uses are that they weren't oskim b'lishma. They weren't doing it for the right reason, right? They were doing it because if they weren't doing the mitzvot, there's no reason to ask the Navi, why are we exiled? It must be that they were doing it, but they were, his words here, right? You have the end, that they were klomar b'kavanata, right? They weren't doing it with the right intention and the right desire and the right path. Others, I've learned from the word loholchuba, which means you walk along the path of the Torah. It's one thing to follow the mitzvot. It's a whole other thing to live your life, as walking on that path. Anyway, so that's the Agadata for the beginning of today. And so we're now where the bet is, if you see in the Gemara, where the Bach is, we're right below that. Isi ben Yehuda lo ata l'metifta de Rabbi Yossi tlata yumi. Isi Rabbi Yehuda, who must have been a nice student, he didn't show up for yeshiva for 3 days to the metifta of Rabbi Yossi. So this was a little bit of a word got around. Isi's dropping out of school, right? So Ashkeche Vardimos, Rabbi Yossi's son Vardimos, which Charlie probably could comment on what this nice, sounds like a Greek name to me, but Vardimos, the son of Rabbi Yossi, bumped into Rav Isi bar Yehuda, and he said to him, Amarle, my time human, right? Everyone's talking about it. Why didn't you show up in Shir for the last 3 days? Amarle, so Rav Isi bar Yehuda said back, you know what? I don't understand your father. I lost him. I no longer understand anything he says because he taught us this thing. He explained it to us. It made no sense to me. I don't feel like I can have him as a teacher anymore. He's saying things that make no sense, which is a fascinating insight into the teacher-student relationship, right? You think you go just to learn, but if it doesn't make any sense, it doesn't make any sense. So I'm looking for a new teacher. Amar Le, so the son, Vardimos, said to Isi ben Yehuda, Lema mar Mike Amar Le. Well, can you maybe tell me what he said that was so, out of the box to you? Dilma Yadana Time. Maybe I can explain it to you. I grew up in that house. Maybe I could tell you what my father was referring to. So Amar Le, so he said, look, it was from yesterday's Daf Yomi. It said yesterday, we learned in a Braita, the Tanya, Rabbi Yossi Omar, Kvisatan Kodmin L'Chaye Acherim. Right? We had a very crazy pshat, Rabbi Yossi said yesterday, which is that if you have enough water in your reservoir, right, to only support a certain amount of people, and you have enough water to support you have enough for your food and your animals, but you need X amount of water to do your laundry. But if you use the water for your laundry, the people downstream are going to have no water to eat and drink, right, for their own life. So you would think, one opinion in the Braita was that their food comes before your laundry. But Rabbi Yossi said, no, your kfisa, your water that's for your own laundry comes before people downstream who need it for food. So that seems to me, Isi Bar Yehuda, to be outrageous. I can't understand a value system or a world in which that comes from. How does he know that? Kra minale, right? What's the verse that supports that? Kra minale. Where in the world does your father know that from the Torah? So now it's not clear if he asked Yossi this question, right? Because that seems to be what he should have done, but he didn't. It's not clear. But Amalei, so Vardima said back to Isi Bar Yehuda, no, it's based on a pasuk. The pasuk says, and I'm going to read again the pasuk from Nava, so hopefully everyone has that. It says this is talking about the cities that you would make for the Leviim. Right? So remember, they set aside cities for those who couldn't work the land. The Leviim and the Kohanim didn't have land, so you had to set up a city for them. And remember, we learned about this in Erchin, that the cities had to have a space around them for a park, for free land that they could, have animals in and have water in. So it says in the pasuk, I'm quoting now, Hayu ha'arim lahem l'shevet, the cities will be for them to live in, umigrashehem, in the, I don't know how you translate migrash, the parks basically, around them, hayu livehem tam, will be for their animals, Ulerechusham, and for their property, Ulecho chayatam, and for all their, now we think chayatam sounds like all their wild animals, like a chaya, right? Like they're dogs, I would say. Okay, wolves maybe. So it says Vardimas, it says in the pasuk, Umigrushehem yulevehem tam, Ulecho chayatam. My chayatam, what is that referring to? Even machaya, it's referring to an animal. You said lebehem tam. You said already they're animals. Halo chaya bichlal behimahi. Right? You already included that you need space for your animals. Why do you need to talk about two different kinds of animals? Elamai chayatam. Chayatam means, right? Chiyuta. If it's chiyuta mamash, if it's because you need it to stay alive, pshita. Obviously, you give them land for that. Elav fisa. It must be saying that they need to have land and ponds and lakes outside of their city so that they have enough water to do their laundry. And so the Torah is basically telling you that doing your laundry is considered to be chayutan, is considered to be your own livelihood. So laundry is not a dispensable thing. Laundry is indispensable, and that's why Rabbi Yossi says that your laundry comes before other people's food. The ha'ika, tsara, da'aruvita, as we said yesterday, if you get your clothes dirty, you end up getting all kinds of skin infections and wounds and unhealing things. And that's why we view laundry as being a critical part of life. And it's just as important as eating and drinking. And that's based on the pasuk.
We don't appreciate today with our modern automatic washers and dryers how big a deal laundry used to be. It was a huge burden, and it still uses a lot of water.
Yeah.
Right. So that was very critical. Okay, continues the Gemara. The Mishnah said, at the beginning of our parak, Rabbi Yossi said, Ein elo nidre ino nefesh. Remember, the Mishnah had examples where a woman who's married says, I'm going to make a neder that I'm not going to wash, or I'm not going to put on makeup. And so according to the Tanna Kama, that's ino nefesh. You can't If you can't, wash, you can't freshen yourself up, that's considered to be tsar. Rabbi Yossi said, and now we're quoting, Ein elu nidre inoy nefesh. These are not considered to be inoy nefesh. And the Gemara said yesterday, right? Because you just, whatever, you don't wash. It's not the end of the world. Ibailu. Ask the Gemara, according to Rabbi Yossi, Mahu sheyafer mishum dvarim shebeino leveina. Can the husband be mefer her neder because it impacts him, right? So he can't be mefer it because it hurts her, but it does impact him. Maybe he doesn't want to live with someone who didn't take a shower or didn't bathe. He didn't really have showers, but who didn't bathe, right? So can he be made for it because of that part? Remember, it would matter, in which case the hafara would only be for him if he got divorced or if he died, her neder would go back to everybody, right? Because it's a neder about herself. It's not a neder about him. But maybe for the time that he's alive or it impacts him, he would have a hafara. So Tashma, well, let's try to learn from the Mishnah. Now we're quoting the Mishnah. I'm Rabbi Yossi, 7 lines from the bottom. Ein elu nidre inoy nefesh, right? All Rabbi Yossi said in our Mishnah was that this is not a neder of inoy nefesh. He didn't say ein elu neder or ein elu anything, right? He just said it's not a neder of inoy nefesh, implying this is not what he says, but this is implied that it would still be an issue that interferes with their relationship, and therefore the husband can be mefer because it interferes with their connection. Well, that's not necessarily the case. Dilma liditru kamrluhu. Maybe Rabbi Yossi was saying it according to the Chachamim, meaning lididi, according to me, washing is overrated. You don't really need to take showers. And so therefore, it doesn't impact. It's not such a big deal for her. It's not such a big deal for him. So she doesn't take a shower. It's not nice, maybe, but it's not the end of the world. But lididchu, you, on the other hand, who say you claim that it does impact them. Maybe not. Maybe you wouldn't call this inoy nefesh, because even though it's unpleasant, right? Inoy nefesh might imply a whole nother level of pain. Right, so maybe at least admit to me that this is not falling into the category of things that cause significant pain. So how do we resolve this question? So there are 2 opinions. Rav Ada bar Ava says mefer, that in fact the husband can be mefer. If a wife says, I'm not going to wash, even according to Rabbi Yossi, that it's not called inoy nefesh, it certainly impacts her husband, and he could say to her, well, when you're living with me, you're going to wash, and that's a hafara, right? But Rav Huna says, ein mefer, as Nava would have guessed. Rav Huna disagrees and says it's not hafara. Why? Why don't you say it impacts the husband? I love this Gemara. Some people might be offended by it. But Shalom Matzino, or top line of Pei Aleph Amabet, Shalom Matzino Shu'al Shemeit Afar Pir, which is a way to say you can get used to anything, right? So the words literally mean you never find a fox that dies by the stench of its cave, of its foxhole. Right? Foxes, at least according to what I understand from Fantastic Mr. Fox, foxes, take a lot of food and disgusting things. They bring it into their foxhole and it smells to high heavens. But that's what you get used to. That's what their home is. And so you get used to rotting, stinking, smelly things. And so even if a husband has a wife who makes a neder that she's not going to make take a shower, he'll get used to it. It'll become the norm essentially. Ron is a different shop, and I'm gonna stick with this one because I like it more. In any event, and I understand it more. So that is that's the second opinion of Rav Huna. Tanya Kavati Rav Ada bar Ava. In fact, there was a braita that supports the opinion of Rav Ada bar Ava that Dvarim. This is now a quote from the Tosefta, the second line on the top of Pei Aleph Amabet. It says the Tosefta, Dvarim sheyesh behen inoy nefesh, a woman, a neder that involves suffering, bein meifar bein beino levena, bein beino levena chayrim. The husband can be meifar for the way it interacts with him and for other people, meaning obviously it impacts someone else. He can be meifar completely. But nidarim she'ein behen inoy nefesh, a neder that is not inoy nefesh but does impact the husband, beino levena meifar. He can be meifar if it impacts him, but beino levena chayrim eino meifar. If it impacts other people, he can't be meifar. Now says the Braita, we've been waiting all this time for this. Ketzad. Let's get some examples. So let's give some specifics to these abstract notions. What's a specific? Amra, let's say a woman says, Konem Perot Alai. I am never going to eat all fruits in this world are like a karban to me. So that is considered inoi nefesh, because not eating is, of course, a big deal. So hareze yafer. So the husband can be made for that neder if he wants to, right? He doesn't have to be, but he can be. Hareze yafer. But if she says, Konim she'eni oseh lefi abba, I make a neder that I'm not going to help, support, or feed, or give things to your father, or lefi achicha, sorry, your brother, or lefi, where am I? Sorry, lefi avicha, lefi
Achai.
Sorry, where I missed some words. Yeah, lefi abba, my father, lefi achicha, lefi avicha, lefi achai, or shelo atein tevim lefnei behemtecha, or she says, I'm not going to give food to your animals, or mayim lefnei bekarecha, I'm not going to give water to your animals that need water. Ein yachol lahafer. Then the husband cannot be mefer, because that's not inoi nefesh. It doesn't obviously pain her not to work, and it doesn't impact him directly. She's not saying, I'm not going to serve you, saying, I'm not going to serve your father, or my father, or your animals. The Ran, of course, points out that we discussed in Ketubot that a woman has a responsibility to do certain things, and this would have to be a circumstance where she had, a lot of servants to do all those things. So it wouldn't be her shirking responsibility, but she not going to do it personally. And so therefore, it's not beino levena, as Nava remembers from the Mishnah. We said in the Mishnah in Ketubot, if she comes in with 4 shvachot, then she could just sit back and and drink lemonade in the sun, right? In the shade, sorry. We said Yoshevet b'katedra. She can sit in her cathedral or whatever we called it. So it has to be that kind of circumstance, but that's not considered to be beino levena. It's only considered to be his family. Now continues the Braita. If she says shelo ekcho v'lo efkos, I'm not going to put on makeup. I don't really remember the difference, right? One is eyeshadow, one is makeup. Or shelo ashamesh mitati, I'm not going to sleep with you, to her husband. Then yafer, then the husband can be mayfair, but only mishum dvarim shebeino levena, right? That's because that's a personal thing. So it impacts him if she's not looking well, or she's not taking care of herself. It impacts him if she's not sleeping with him, obviously, and therefore he can be mayfair. But as we said, if he then died, that neder would still apply to her for other people, right? Because it's only things that are impacting him. Now continues the Braita. Shelo atzia lecha mitatcha. Let's say she says to her husband, I'm so angry with you, I swear I'm not going to spread out your bed. I'm not going to make your bed. Shelo emzog lecha et hakos. I'm not going to prepare your wine for you. Shelo erchatz lecha panecha yadecha v'raglecha. I'm not going to wash your face or your feet or your hands, which are all, as you recall, fundamental requirements that a woman has for her husband. Then ein tzarich lafer. He doesn't even need to be made for her neder, because she doesn't have the ability to do that. As a wife, she's responsible to do these things. She can't make a neder and say, I'm not going to do what the Torah requires me to do. And so therefore, her neder is not even chal. So you don't need hafara in that case. It's not that it impacts him. It's fundamental to what she has to do. And therefore, her words mean nothing. She can't say that. It's like making a neder that say she's not going to keep Shabbos or something. She can't do it. She already has a requirement. Rabbi Gamliel, however, says, and this comes
So the previous case, he also it is chal, but he can, the previous case about looking
correct.
good.
If she says, I'm not going to take a shower, according to this Braita, then this is what the Braita is saying, right? We're including ekol and efkos in the category of personal hygiene. Let's put it that way. So she says, I'm not going to take care of my personal hygiene. Then the husband can be mayfair because it's beino levena. If the husband says, I don't care, so don't take care of your personal hygiene, he doesn't have to be mayfair, right? It's not something that it's necessarily required. So that's up to the husband. But these things, if she says, I'm not going to serve you wine, that's like she has a requirement to serve him wine. It's part of her marriage requirement. And therefore, there's no neder.
So she's not required to sleep with him.
We're going to ask that in a little bit. We'll get there.
Okay. Maybe she's not. I don't know.
Right. We'll get there. We'll discuss that tomorrow's probably. We'll discuss it. But we're going to discuss it. Don't worry. So Rabbi Gamliel says something fascinating. And again, we're going to discuss later today whether we paskin this way. The Ran goes through a discussion about it. But Rabbi Gamliel says that even though, this is how the Ran understands it, even though this neder clearly has no implication, a woman who gets up and says, I married a man, I'm responsible to take care of him, but I make a neder, I'm never going to give him another drink. Not because he's drunk, but right, I'm never going to give him something else to eat. is there's no netter. Says Rabbi Gamliel, even though there's no netter, the fact that you got up and said it, you should go and be mefer, right? Even though what you said was meaningless, your words matter, and you should take them seriously, midrabanan meaning, right? And you should get a hafara, just so it's clear that even though you said it, it's no longer going to apply. Says Rabbi Gamliel, yafer. We asked the husband to be mefer. She should ask him to be mefer. Shenemar lo yachel devaro. That's what lo yachel devaro means. Don't denigrate or don't put aside your words, even if they don't have effect. Even if what you said cannot happen, you shouldn't trivialize your words. Davar acher, another explanation, lo yachel devaro, is mikan lechacham shein matir nidrei atzmo. That a chacham cannot get rid of his own nidarim. Even, right, remember we said, when you're mefer a netter, when you're shoel on a netter, you go to a chacham, but a chacham cannot do it for himself. This is why on Erev Yom Kippur, Erev Rosh Hashanah, we have a beit din of everybody, right? Even if you're a chacham. It says lo yachel divaro. You can't make your own words become mutar. So you can't do it even if you're a chacham and you understand it's not enough. You have to go to a different chacham to be matir your netter, to permit your netter. Now, this is the end of the bright. How do we prove from here what Rabbi Yossi holds? Because says the Gemara, man shamina da'amar shlachol v'shlafkos dvarim shebeino leveina havyin. Who would have an opinion that if a woman says, I'm not going to take care of my personal hygiene, that's considered something beino leveina? It's only Rabbi Yossi. Because according to the Chachamim, if a woman says, I'm not going to take care of my personal hygiene, that's considered to be tsar, right? That's inoi. That's what they said in our Mishnah. In which case, the husband can be matir the netter, made for the netter, sorry, because it's inoi, for no matter what. This braita, which made it sound like it's only beino leveina, must be only Rabbi Yossi, and it says Katani in the braita clearly, meifar mishum dvarim shebeino leveina. So the braita very clearly says that even according to Rabbi Yossi, who must be the author of this braita, when a woman says, I'm not going to take care of my personal hygiene, the husband can be made for that netter because of the way it impacts him. So you see that according to the Chachamim, he can be made for the netter because it's inoi nefesh. According to Rabbi Yossi, it's not called inoi nefesh, but it is still meferable, that's a new verb, right? It's still, you can get rid of it due to the fact that it's beino leveina. Now, ask the Hanan's question, right? Amar Mar, we said, if she said, Shelo ashamesh mitati, if she says, I'm not going to sleep with you, then yafer mishum dvarim shebeino leveina. Hechidam. Now, what's the case? I don't understand. What did she say? If she said, I never want to get any, you cannot benefit from sleeping with me. So she basically asked her husband on sleeping with her. That's, you don't need to be made for that. She doesn't have the right to do that, right? She can't take that away from him. It's another one of the responsibilities of marriage, is that he's allowed to get benefit from sleeping with her. And so she's agreed to be married. She can't say, you're not allowed to sleep with me. So that wouldn't require him to make a hafara. It would be like giving him a drink, right? It's one of the things she's responsible to him. She can't prohibit that on him, right? Ella must be ba'omeret hana'at tashmishech alai. She asks herself on getting benefit from sleeping with him. So she says, I will never get any benefit from sleeping with you. And that's where Rav Kahana said, Rav Kahana, if a person says, Hana'at tashmishi alayich, that you can't get benefit from me, kofer misham shato, right? We force her to sleep with him because she cannot prohibit him from getting that hana'ah. It's not in her power. But if she says, Hana'at tashmishech alay, if she offers benefit for herself, then you have to be fair, because ein machilin et adam davar ha'asur lo. You won't give a person something that is prohibited to them. And so since she basically made a prohibition on herself, it ends up de facto. Remember, we had this case earlier in regards to other mitzvah. You can't make a netter that you're not going to do a mitzvah. But if you make a netter that you're not going to get hana'ah from sitting in a sukkah, right? Remember, if you had that netter, then you're not allowed to sit in the sukkah. The netter is chal on you because you're not automatically, I mean, you are automatically, but you're not directly impacting the mitzvah. You're impacting yourself, and the implication is that you can't do the mitzvah. And so in such a case where a woman said, I will not get any benefit from sleeping with a man or with her husband, then she is usher to him. And if he wants to sleep with her, he has to be made for the netter, which he can be made for, because it's beino leveina. So he certainly can do it, but he would have to be made for the netter. It wouldn't be abrogated automatically. This was that complicated idea that a netter can be chal even where it is uproots a mitzvah because of, according to Rav Yehuda at least, because of this concept of ein machilin et adam davor ha'asor lo. We don't feed a person something that is prohibited to them.
So let's say somebody doesn't like to sit in the sukkah. So they prohibit hana'ah on themselves from sitting in the sukkah, right? They don't like it.
Right.
I mean, they're obligated, but they're not into it. So in that case.
So this was the opinion. This was Rav Kahana's opinion. We had this earlier in the Masechta, that she would be prohibited from sitting in the sukkah, according to that.
Okay. So she get out of it by just.
Getting out of it, she'd be over on an Isser. I mean,
She doesn't like it. She doesn't like to sit in the sukkah. That's
right.
So she can get out of doing.
I mean, again, remember the woman's not chayat, right? But in that case, but let's say it was something that she were, yeah, absolutely, she would not be able to fulfill the mitzvah, and she would miss the mitzvah. I mean, it's not a good thing, right? You could also just not go sit in the sukkah, right? It's not, no one's stopping you, but
there are ways that you can get yourself exempted from sitting in a sukkah if you're not at home, if you're always you're traveling the entire time.
Chanon's asking, we understand that, but the point is that yes, she would not be allowed to go in the sukkah if in this theoretical case where she made a neder that I will get no hana from sitting outside in the sun or sitting out in a hut for the next 3 weeks, kind of thing.
Let's say she doesn't enjoy sex, it's painful or whatever, or she doesn't. So
that's a whole, right.
So she made this neder,
Right, but then her husband has the ability to say, I don't accept it. But if he doesn't, he can let it be chal, and then it would be.
Okay.
Yeah, so I mean that.
Isn't he supposed to divorce her under such circumstances, and she loses her ketubah?
Correct. We had a whole discussion about this in Ketubot, if you recall.
Yeah.
In terms of what kind of pain, what difficulty. Absolutely. There are circumstances where he would be allowed to divorce her without giving her a ketubah, or he should divorce her. So it's a complicated discussion that we did have in the Masechta Ketubot. Okay, you can force her to do it. Anyways, continues the Gemara. Where are we up to? Mantana. Who is the following author of the Braita? Haditanya. Devarim hamutarim. This is the last thing we're going to do today. Says the Braita, which we've had several times already in Shas. We'll have more things that are mutar. You have an action that is permitted, but acherim nahagu bahen isur. There are other people who, for whatever reason, don't do this activity. So it's something you're totally allowed to do, but other people have accepted upon themselves that they're not going to do it. This gets very complex because the question is, why did they accept it, right? Sometimes people accept things because they want to make a harchaka, right? They want to make an extra layer. Sometimes because they're mistaken. They think it's prohibited, right? So people say, I'm not going to eat these foods together, but they're wrong. So the question, of course, is to what does this extend? Is it just knowing Isur because they want to be more religious, because they're mistaken, because they've got some other hang-up that's not related to the Torah? So it will have implications, because we're going to see in a second, if you have something which is technically from the Torah permitted, right? But other people are noheg behem Isur, right? Then, where am I? You're not allowed to act in front of them beheter. If you go to a community where they don't do something, you can't act differently than what they have accepted as their isur. Why? In order to change their mind. Because it says, again, this is the Braita, it says I'm not sure how to translate yachal, but no, don't negate, don't make chulin the words of somebody else. If people have taken on a commitment, even though it's technically not required min ha-Torah, you shouldn't get rid of that thing. You shouldn't deny it. So davar acher, now another spot in this gear says a little bit migumgam, right? Is the way the Bach has the girsa, which makes a lot more sense, is that these are the words Rabbi Gamliel. These are the words of Rabbi Gamliel. And then we quote the Braita that we just had earlier from the Tosefta. As Rabbi Gamliel said, that you should be mefer the neder of the wife, even if it's a ridiculous neder, right? Even if she makes a neder, I'm not going to give my husband food, which it doesn't have any chalot, but you should still be mefer. Mishum shenemar lo yachel devaro. And then the Braita quotes, Davar acher lo yachel devaro mikan tamid chacham she'en mefer nidrei atzmo. Another pshat is that you can't be made for your nedarim yourself, but that this is in fact the opinion of Rabbi Gamliel, who says that you should take a person's word seriously, even if they mean nothing. Meaning, even if a wife says something that's not chal, because it can't be applied, the husband should still be meifar. And similarly, if someone accepts on themselves something that's asur, even though it's technically mutar, you should respect their isur and not act differently in front of them. And so the Ran quotes here, he says, Mikan haya omer Rabbi Yehuda Kohen, that if a person has a minhag or is noheg, that they're going to be a vegetarian, right? Shalol da'al basar, they're not going to eat food or drink wine, bisman miyuchad, let's say on Tuesdays, right? And then they decide that they want to do it, they should make a net, they should have a hafaral of their neder, right? That you should view it, and this is of course how way people practice, right? You for whatever reason, you make a commitment, you're going to exercise 30 minutes every day. And then you stop doing it, you should take those words seriously and treat it like a neder, even though it's not a neder, midoraita, but you should treat it like that the same way Rabbi Gamliel said that if a woman says, I'm not going to feed her husband or wash his feet, her words mean nothing because she has to do it, but the husband should be mefer. And so that's where, of course, it's a very common minhag. That one of the reasons we do have Torah Nedarim, right, is that even though you don't you don't explicitly make a neder, the fact that you're noheg isur has the implications of something similar to a neder. That's the Ran quotes that. He quotes other opinions that disagree. Anyways, that is or there's other opinions, but that's how he quotes it. We're going to stop here. We can pick it up tomorrow. 2 lines from the bottom. V'amine Rava. What time are we learning tomorrow? If I can get a confirmation.
Anytime.
I'm out of
7:30.
town. I have no idea what my schedule is tomorrow.
So
7:30.
should we do in the morning 7:30? Is that
Yeah.
Just pick a time. Just pick a time, and I may or may not come.
well, okay. Well, we'd love to have you though. So anytime that
No, it's just that we haven't figured out our schedule for.
okay, so I'm gonna let's say 7:45 in the morning, which is probably what it says in the bulletin.
Right.
Because it's not, it won't take an hour for the daf. So 7:45 tomorrow morning. I'm also going to do it on Monday for Martin Luther King Day, but we can decide if it's going to do the same time that day.
I might be able to make it. We're going to be in a hotel in Philadelphia. So,
Okay. 7:45 tomorrow morning. I hope everyone can join on the same Zoom channel. Shavua Tov.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Shavua
Yasher
tov.
tov.